When you start your fitness journey, you are bombarded with advices from all directions. Most of it is useful, especially since beginners don't need as much precision as experienced athletes to progress. However, a lot of this advice lacks context, and the people giving it rarely go in depth about what it actually means. If we were to list all the useful tips for gym beginners, we'd need days, probably weeks. So, instead of overwhelming them with endless information, let's focus on a different approach. Rather than giving them more tips, let's add depth and context to the ones they've already heard. This way, they will not only follow instructions, but also understand the reasoning behind them, allowing them to make better decisions in the long run. Today, I will break down 3 of the most frequently given fitness tips and explain them in detail so that understanding and knowledge can go hand in hand. Let's start with a well-known topic: compound movement versus isolation movement. First, let's define the terms. A compound movement involves multiple joints. For example, when you squat, you bend and extend your knees, but your hips and ankles also move. Similarly, during an overhead press, both your elbows and shoulders are involved. In contrast, an isolation movement targets a single joint. For example, a biceps curl or a triceps extension primarily involves movement at the elbow. As a result, isolation movement often focus on a single muscle, such as the bicep or the tricep, even though this muscle consists of multiple heads, but you get the idea. A common mistake among beginners is wanting to build big arms, big chest, big glutes, or big whatever as fast as possible. They often focus a lot on isolation exercises to target a specific muscle group and end up being disappointed with their progress. This is why the vast majority of training programs emphasize on compound movements, especially for beginners. A common guideline is 80% compound movement and 20% isolation movement, though this ratio can be adjusted depending on the athlete's specificities, goals, and needs. For example, pull-ups primarily work your back, mainly the lats and teres major, but they also engage your biceps and forearms. Instead of doing individual isolation exercises to target each of these muscle groups, a single compound movement allows you to save time, energy, and delivers better results. Additionally, compound movements often mimic basic human movement patterns such as pushing, pulling, squatting, or hinging, for example. They are also better suited for strength development, which plays a key role in muscle growth. For example, squats will develop your lower body strength more effectively than leg extensions, simply because it engages a greater number of muscle and joints to handle the load, allowing you to lift heavier and developing more muscle group. So, if you're a beginner or even if you have some experience, focus on mastering the basics, getting stronger, and progressively working on these movements in different ways. My personal recommendation: master these 10 exercises that will target your entire body and add variety to your training. Squats, deadlift, lunges, overhead press, bench press, dips, push-ups, pull-ups, rowings, and farmer's carry. Tip number 2, movement execution. Does the perfect form exist? There are 2 common schools of thoughts when it comes to exercise technique. 1. The perfect form believers who insist that every movement must be performed with textbook precision down to the last millimeter or else you'll get injured. They are the ones that think that any loaded lumbar flexion will lead to sciatica, or that if your knees cave in during a squat, they will collapse. 2. The adaptability crowd, who argue that most movement can be performed in lots of different ways, with adaptations depending on the individual. Some of them go too far and think that any movement can be performed in any possible way, and then don't understand why some athletes get injured. The truth lies somewhere in between. Is there such a thing as a perfect form? No, because your body proportion, your goals, your experience, your performances, your preferences will all influence the way you perform an exercise. This means that no single squat, bench press, or deadlift technique will be perfect for everybody. However, this does not mean that fundamental movement principles should be ignored. Take the deadlift as an example. For years, we thought that the only way to perform it without injuring yourself was to lift with a perfectly straight back. Today, we know that some degree of spinal flexion is not inherently dangerous, and some strength athletes even use it strategically. So, what should you do? If your goal is to build strength and muscle and not to compete in powerlifting, start by learning the most conventional technique. It's the easiest and safest way to begin. As you gain experience, you can experiment with variations or adjust your technique based on your goals. But don't worry if your lower back slightly rounds up during a lift. It does not mean immediate injury. Simply focus on progression, proper execution, and control. The same applies to squats. If you're not a powerlifter, don't obsess about your exact foot placement, the position of the bar, the depth of the squat. Instead, learn to control the range of motion that suits your body and your goals, brace properly, and focus on progressive overload. In short, learn the movements in a safe and simple way first, then adjust them based on your training evolution. And don't fear minor imperfections. Injuries are more likely to come from excessive load, poor programming, and fatigue than small form deviations. Tip number 3, training volume. How much should beginners train? Here's a helpful reminder. Training creates fatigue, but improvement happens during recovery. For progress to occur, you must not train more than you can recover from. Recovery comes from factors like sleep, nutrition, stress levels, or experience. So why should beginners train less? When you start lifting, your body is not yet adapted to the stress of resistant training. This means that you will need more rest to recover from your sessions. So shorter trainings are often enough to allow beginners to make progress while preventing excessive fatigue. But that also means that lower volumes will be enough for your body to start adapting and improving. That being said, not all beginners are the exact same. A 30-year-old who's always been active will likely handle training volume better than a 90-year-old who has never done sports before. Someone who has spent his childhood jumping, running, and playing outside will likely recover better than someone who has always been sedentary. Your past activity levels influence your ability to recover, so take them into account when programming yourself. Now, how do you know if you're training too much? Pay attention to your progress. If you're training too hard, too soon, you'll likely quickly hit a plateau. Increase volume gradually. Add more sets, reps, or sessions only when your body has adapted. Also, adapt your training plan to your recovery capacities. You will not need the same recovery depending if you're training a full body split, a push-pull leg, or an upper lower. And if your sleep, diet, or stress level are not optimal, adjust your training accordingly. Never forget that intensity beats volume, so if needed, do less, but do it with full intent and focus. Involve yourself in your training. Quality beats quantity, and results will come faster than you think. I hope this video was helpful. If you have any questions, suggestions, or anything else, feel free to drop a comment, or you can contact me straight from my socials in the description down below. And don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to help the channel out. I'll see you next Sunday, and until then, train hard, stay consistent, and never forget, make yourself proud.